Welcome to Photos and Travel, a show that introduces you to fascinating places around the world. Please welcome our host and tour guide, Jonathan Van Bilsen.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Photos and Travel, where we bring the world to your doorstep. Today's show is entitled Bears and Gold because we're going to start in Canada's Yukon territory and learn all about the Klondike gold rush. Then we're going to head east to Hudson's Bay and see if we can't find some polar bears. We'll begin our trek right after these messages.
At Voss, your independent grocer, it's all about hometown living and shopping. Owned and operated by Terry and Christine Voss, their newly renovated Port Perry store carries many local items to support our town and its residents. Pet Value has a fleet of services to help you and your pets to live their very best lives. Visit Pet Value in Port Perry to discover a world of expertise, friendly staff, and everything you need for your pets. Pet Value, your pet, your store.
Welcome back. Canada's Yukon territory is a vast wilderness with an amazing history. I started my adventure in Dawson City, and we were immediately met with an amazing challenge. Massive flash floods, however, which happened quite regularly, washed out the road, and instead of our usual 6-hour trek, I ended up driving to Whitehorse, which took about 13 hours. I was grateful my driver Blaine had experienced this many times in the past. With a population of just over 20,000, Whitehorse is the largest city in the Yukon territory. With only 27 hours of sunshine during the entire month of December and January temperatures of minus 50, it takes a certain type of person to live here all year round. I stopped at the Beringium Museum to learn about life in early Canada. Whitehorse is the finishing point for the Yukon Quest, a 1,000-kilometer or 600-mile dog sled race that starts in Fairbanks, Alaska. The Yukon Quest is the most difficult dog sled race in the world, and racers endure ice, snow, and extreme cold. Wildlife is common along the trail, and participants often face challenges from wolves and moose. Sled dogs can be any breed, but once they're hooked up to a sled, they're referred to as huskies. These dogs are bred for distance and are capable of running up to 100 kilometers or 60 miles in one day. Their Siberian counterparts are bred for speed and can only endure half that distance. These animals have two purposes. They live to run, and they love attention. I stopped at a small outpost along the way to enjoy what seemed to be the largest cinnamon rolls in the world. Next to it, the Montague Roadhouse was built in 1915 and was used as a roadhouse until the 1950s. The kitchen and eating area were on the main floor, and the bedrooms were upstairs. The inside of the building was lined with cheesecloth in an effort to keep moss and dirt from falling into the rooms, as well as cutting down on mold. And of course, no trip to the Yukon is complete until one pans for gold. Taking careful instruction from professionals, I was quite surprised when I actually found some gold nuggets in the bottom of the pan. After my success in prospecting and finding gold, I visited a giant gold mining barge no longer in use. During its operation, it would crawl along the ground, gathering tons of rocks and discarding everything except the precious gold nuggets. After a fantastic visit to Whitehorse, I headed north to Dawson City, the second largest town in the Yukon territory. Dawson City is in the process of being restored. Many of the buildings were damaged due to permafrost and are slowly retaking shape in their original glory. Dawson sprang up overnight after gold was discovered in the Bonanza Creek in 1896. Word spread fast, and by 1898, the population had grown to 40,000. Among the inhabitants of Dawson City was author Jack London, whose famous book Call of the Wild sold millions. Another resident was poet Robert Service, whose famous poem The Cremation of Sam McGee is still published today. During the gold rush, Americans traveled from Seattle to Alaska and then on foot to the Klondike. Most were unprepared for the sub-zero temperatures and long snowy winters. The Canadian government decided not to let anyone enter the country unless they were prepared with a year's supply of goods, which weighed about a ton, half of it being food. Would-be prospectors encountered Canada's famous Northwest Mounted Police, now the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who enforced the laws in this vast wilderness. Of the more than 100,000 people who came to the Klondike in search of gold, only 30,000 survived. A total of 12.5 million ounces of gold has been taken out of this area in the last century. I boarded the SS Klondike, one of the original steamships to travel the Yukon River. Now fully restored, it was quite a treat to sail down this historic river just like they did in the days of old, giving me a glimpse of life during the gold rush era. I left Dawson City by crossing the Yukon River, slowly making my way back to the Alaskan border. Road construction is a full-time task during the summer months, and many hours are spent waiting for construction crews to do their jobs. My next stop was the small town of Chicken, which received its unusual name when early gold miners were unable to spell the chosen name, which was that of a bird that somewhat resembled a chicken. In typical tourist tradition, everything in this town has something to do with our fine feathered friends. I stopped overnight in the city of Tok before heading on to the Matanuska Glacier. A small lodge welcomes travelers who are there to view the Blue River of Ice, which descends 3,600 meters or 12,000 feet to its 3-kilometer wide face. My last stop in Alaska was the city of Valdez, which is at the end of the Alaskan pipeline and unfortunately is best known for the large oil spill in the 1980s. It's spelt Valdez but pronounced Valdez to avoid association with the tragedy. The salmon are plentiful in this area, which of course attracts the bears. I stopped at Bridal Veil Falls to enjoy the scenery. And after saying goodbye to my driver Blaine, I took a final look at one of the most rugged areas on the planet. I was blown away by the beauty of the Canadian North and all that the Yukon has to offer. The Klondike history is just amazing when you think of what those people had to endure. After these messages, we'll head east to the northern Hudson Bay town of Churchill and hopefully see some polar bears.
Not all Canadians have the time nor desire to manage their finances, and often that responsibility is up to financial professionals. Our goal is to help Canadian families achieve a happy and successful financial future. Visit us, the McClellan Financial Group of Asante Capital Management.
Top care with top stylists. Book your next hair appointment with Port Perry's award-winning hair salon, Rosario Greco Styles. The hair experience you deserve. Book today. Call 905-985-0099.
Want to look professional? Want customers to remember you? Custom branding from PP Print using the finest embroidery materials and high-end direct transfers will make your brand stand out from the rest. PP Print, more than just printing.
Welcome back. The town of Churchill is over 1,000 kilometers or 600 miles from Winnipeg, the capital of Manitoba, and it takes just over 3 hours by turboprop plane. I arrived at the Lazy Bear Lodge in time for dinner and was pleasantly surprised by the accommodations and the friendliness of the staff. As I checked in, I was greeted by a polar bear, and I knew my adventure was about to begin. The lodge is a quaint log cabin and has quite a history. The timber was reclaimed from a fire in the boreal forest. Using hand tools, the logs fit together so well they appear as if they were melted into each other. The windows were recycled from an 1800s Hudson Bay trading post, and if you look closely, you'll see the characteristic wave of the old glass. In the dining room is a massive stone fireplace, crafted from a 20,000-pound block of stone and mortar. Even the floor came from recycled Douglas fir from the Canadian National Railway warehouse built in the early 1920s. Polar bears are the only animals that actively hunt humans. Consequently, the people of Churchill are always aware of their surroundings. Members of the Polar Bear Alert Program keep a watchful eye around town, and if a bear gets too close, a humane trap is set and the animal is captured. The seized bear is then brought to what is affectionately known as the Polar Bear Jail. Here the bear is kept for several weeks, and then it's airlifted by helicopter to an area well away from town. Sadly, before establishing this facility in 1982, any polar bears which would have come close to the town would have been shot. The town of Churchill is located on Hudson Bay at the mouth of the Churchill River, far above the most Canadian populated areas. With a population of less than 1,000, Churchill is made up of 60% Indigenous people and 40% of European, Chinese, and Filipino descent. In 1717, the Hudson's Bay Company built the first permanent settlement, Churchill River Post, which was a log fort a few kilometers upstream from the mouth of the Churchill River. The trading post and river were named after John Churchill, the first Duke of Marlborough, who was the governor of the Hudson's Bay Company in the late 17th century. Tourism and ecotourism are major contributors to the local economy, with the polar bear season being the largest. Tourists also visit to watch beluga whales in the Churchill River in June and July. The area is also popular for bird watchers and to view the aurora borealis or northern lights. The main grocery store carries a variety of products for the residents of Churchill, but due to transportation costs, prices are much higher than southern, more populated communities. Of course, there is no shortage of souvenir shops with some very unique items for sale. The people of Churchill are very proud of their heritage, and many of the buildings have been decorated with picturesque art depicting life in northern Canada. Sculptures depicting native animals are placed along the main street of town. Churchill has the Inuit Museum. It is a one-room museum which showcases an exceptional collection of Inuit carvings made of whalebone, soapstone, and caribou antler, as well as a 1,000-year-old harpoon head and bone carvings of shamans and bears left over from pre-Inuit cultures. When you enter, you're greeted by a stuffed polar bear and muskox. But what really impressed me was a narwhal horn, which is actually similar to teeth with nerves running throughout. If the end gets broken, the narwhal will try and fill the cavity with dirt and small stones, suggesting they are as sensitive as our teeth. This, a two-horned narwhal skull, is extremely rare. Inukshuk is a man-made stone landmark built for use by the Inuit and other peoples of the Arctic region of North America. Nearby is a monument which pays tribute to people who have lost their lives recently in Hudson Bay. The word Inuit, which means people, is a term used in Canada and is the actual name of the people in their native language. Other nations incorrectly refer to these people as Eskimo, an old colonial name. The town center complex in Churchill houses everything anyone would ever need. Inside is a health center, a high school, a library, a swimming pool, an indoor playground, a curling rink, a theater, a hockey arena, a gymnasium, and a fitness center. And it's open to all the residents of Churchill. This is the Port of Churchill, a privately owned port on Hudson's Bay, which is capable of handling Panama-sized vessels for the loading and unloading of grain and tanker vessels. In 2016, the port shut down, but 2 years later, a consortium of First Nations, local governments, and corporate investors purchased it, and in 2019, the port again began shipping grain. A Curtiss twin-prop cargo aircraft crashed in 1979 as it attempted to return to Churchill Airport shortly after takeoff, after the pilot reported mechanical problems with one of its engines. The plane landed in rough terrain and was badly damaged. The reason for the crash was the owners and pilot thought they could carry more cargo than the allowable limit, hence the name Miss Piggy. The red plane was repainted gray when it was used in a film. The tundra is a region where the tree growth is hindered by low temperatures and short growing seasons. The term tundra comes from the Russian word for treeless mountain. Tundra vegetation is composed of dwarf shrubs, grasses, mosses, and lichens, and scattered trees grow in some regions. The tundra soil contains large amounts of biomass that has been stored as methane and carbon dioxide in the permafrost. As global warming heats the ecosystem and causes the soil to thaw, the permafrost carbon cycle accelerates and releases much of these soil-contained greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. This creates a feedback cycle which increases climate change. During summer months, the polar bears lazily make their way toward Hudson Bay, munching on whatever vegetation they can find. Of course, polar bears are the main reason tourists flock to this area, and the best way to view them is on board a tundra crawler. These million-dollar buses were invented by a mechanic with the Department of Public Works at Fort Churchill. To create the first tundra crawler, he converted an old school bus, combining it with parts of a gravel truck, a snowplow, and a front-end loader. Each crawler has an experienced driver and a guide who explains the surroundings and usually has a keen eye for bears. The wheels of the crawlers are nearly 2 meters or 6 feet high to ensure safety from polar bears, which when standing on their hind legs can reach up to 3 meters or 9 feet tall. It wasn't long before we came upon a mother bear with a 2-year-old cub. Unlike brown and black bears, polar bears are capable of fasting up to several months during late summer and early fall, when they cannot hunt for seals. They're extremely lethargic during this time and eat vegetation that presents itself. They're very cautious not to expend energy, as they'll need all their strength during the winter hunt. It's hard to believe these white fluffy animals are a threat to humans, but in the town of Churchill, it is mandatory that no one locks their houses or cars in the event of someone needing a hasty refuge. Only one person was attacked by a bear in recent history, but it's only through the vigilance of the population that no further accidents have happened. The Arctic crawlers have the ability to travel through water and along very rough terrain, which is a plus as bears tend to wander anywhere. Warmer weather is endangering Arctic species in part by opening the gates for other animals like red foxes, wolves, and brown bears, as well as a host of smaller species to move north. Polar bears adhere to a different schedule than their southern cousins. They do not hibernate during winter months. Instead, they roam across the surface of the frozen Hudson Bay looking for ringed seals. In the summer, when the ice melts, they rest on shore. Every year, starting in mid-October, several hundred bears congregate around Churchill waiting for the ice to form. While the polar bears are on land, the people in Churchill are careful to make wide turns around street corners and never walk alone at night. During Halloween, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police guard the perimeter of the town so the children can go out trick-or-treating. The Inuit people refer to polar bears as Nanook. In Russian, it is usually called the white bear, and in Norwegian, the polar bear is referred to as the ice bear. When they were first discovered in the second half of the 1700s, they were named maritime bear because of their habitat. It was actually in Quebec where the name polar bear originated. The polar bear is found in the Arctic Circle and adjacent land masses as far south as Newfoundland. Due to the absence of human development in its remote habitat, it retains more of its original range than any other carnivore. They range all the way across the Arctic and as far south as James Bay in Canada. The polar bear territory includes Norway, Russia, Alaska, Canada, and Greenland, which is part of Denmark. These 5 nations have signed an international agreement on the conservation of polar bears, which mandates cooperation on research and conservation efforts throughout the bear's range. Bears sometimes swim from Greenland to Iceland, with 5 sightings as of 2016. Modern methods of tracking polar bear populations have only been implemented since the mid-1980s. They're expensive to perform consistently over a large area. The most accurate counts require flying a helicopter in the Arctic climate to find polar bears, then shooting a tranquilizer dart at the bear to sedate it, and then tagging it. Increases in bear sightings around human settlements in recent years are due to hungry bears congregating around food sources, such as garbage areas and populated regions. Tourists are warned not to go out after dark and even during the daytime to be vigilant of their surroundings. The polar bear is a marine mammal because it spends many months of the year at sea. However, it is the only living marine mammal with powerful, large limbs and feet that allow them to cover many kilometers on foot and run on land. Its preferred habitat is the annual sea ice covering the waters over the continental shelf and the Arctic inter-island archipelagos known as the Arctic Ring of Life. The polar bear tends to frequent areas where sea ice meets water to hunt seals that make up most of its diet. Fresh water is limited in these environments, but polar bears are able to produce water through the metabolism of fats found in seal blubber, and are therefore found primarily along the perimeter of the polar ice pack. Annual ice contains areas of water that appear and disappear throughout the year as the weather changes. Seals migrate in response to these changes, and polar bears must follow their prey. In Hudson's Bay, James Bay, and some other areas, the ice melts completely each summer, forcing polar bears to go onto land and wait through the summer months until the next freeze-up. The crawler driver continues to assess the roads, or lack thereof, ensuring safe crossing of small lakes is achievable. Sometimes, if tourists are lucky, polar bears will approach the crawler, mostly out of curiosity, or as a possible food source. The rear section of the vehicle is commonly known as the polar bear snack box. It's a mesh area where unobstructed photographs can be taken. Quite often, the bears will stand on their hind legs to peer into vehicles. This is mostly out of curiosity, or in some cases they just want to have their photos taken. It is important to keep your hands and camera equipment inside the vehicle at all times. As I mentioned before, bears can stand 3 meters or 10 feet on their hind legs, and they're extremely quick. The interaction with polar bears is amazing, and one tends to forget that these cute furry animals are very ferocious and would not hesitate to consider tourists as part of their menu. The curious cub that surrounded our vehicle was never far from Mom's guarding presence. Adult male polar bears weigh between 350 and 700 kilograms, or 750 and 1,500 pounds, and measure about 3 meters or 9 feet in length. Adult females are roughly half the size of males. After a lengthy exploration, our little cub decides it's time for a nap with Mom. The Churchill area of Canada is extremely unique in that there are 4 ecosystems which come together: Hudson's Bay, the tundra, the boreal forest, and the Canadian Shield with its worn rocky surface seen here. Sadly, that ends our adventure to Churchill, Manitoba, home of the polar bears. I learned a great deal about life in a small northern Canadian town. Seeing those polar bears, and so many of them, was very rewarding, with memories to treasure forever. For photosNtravel, I'm Jonathan Van Bilsen. It's been my pleasure to be your tour guide today, and I look forward to our next adventure. If you enjoyed this program, please click the subscribe button and you'll never miss an episode.
StandardNewspaper.ca, we try to spread the good news. Even in tough times, we accept the challenge of keeping you informed. So from local contests to local happenings, let's show our support for all those who keep our communities strong.
Want to know what's happening in Skugog? News and lifestyle, changes in business, and all the entertainment information you'll ever need. Plus, each edition has a new photosNtravel article. Look for your next copy in your mailbox.